The city breathed in its usual rhythm, honking cars, chattering crowds, the distant hum of construction. But on one quiet corner near the old library, time seemed to slow. A boy sat on the sidewalk, knees drawn up, fingers resting on the slightly warped keys of a second-hand keyboard balanced on a milk crate. The cord snaked across the pavement to a nearby cafe outlet, its plug held together with electrical tape. His clothes were clean but worn thin at the elbows, his sneakers scuffed from miles of walking. A coffee can sat open beside him, half filled with coins and a few crumpled bills. He wasn't begging. He was playing. Softly at first, just a few notes of Fur Elise, the kind of tune people recognized even if they didn't know its name. Tourists paused for a second, dropped a quarter, kept walking. Office workers on lunch break barely glanced his way. But he didn't mind. He played for the same reason he'd played every day since his grandmother passed, because it kept her close. She used to sit on their tiny porch, humming Chopin while stirring soup, saying, "Music is the language of the heart when words run out." Now, with no one left to talk to, he let his fingers speak for him. The afternoon wore on. Rain clouds gathered, casting long shadows over the street. He didn't pack up. Rain meant fewer people, but also fewer distractions. Sometimes, in the quiet, he dared to play harder pieces, the ones he'd learned by watching blurry videos on the library's old computer, pausing and rewinding until his fingers ached. He'd never had a real teacher, just memory, patience, and a stubborn kind of hope. Then a sleek black SUV rolled to a stop at the curb. The window slid down. Out stepped a man in a charcoal suit, polished shoes clicking against the wet pavement. He carried himself like someone used to being watched, chin high, shoulders back, eyes scanning the street like he owned it. His name was known in boardrooms and business magazines, but here, on this ordinary sidewalk, he looked out of place like a painting hung in the wrong room. He spotted the boy. "Seriously?" he said, turning to the man beside him. "That's what passes for talent these days? A kid banging on a toy with a power cord?" His voice wasn't quiet. People nearby turned. The boy kept his eyes on the keys, but his fingers stilled. The man in the suit stepped closer, arms crossed. "You think that's music?" "That's noise," he smirked. "Tell you what. Play something that doesn't sound like a broken music box, and I'll adopt you right here. Give you a real home, real lessons, the whole fairy tale." A few people laughed nervously. One woman looked away, uncomfortable. The man's tone wasn't kind. It was a joke, a performance for his entourage. He didn't mean it. He just liked being the loudest voice in the room. The boy didn't cry. He didn't snap back. He just sat there, small and still, the rain starting to mist around him. For a long moment he stared at his hands, small, calloused from carrying groceries and scrubbing floors, but steady. Then, without looking up, he placed his fingers back on the keys. He didn't play Fur Elise again. He took a breath and began Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. The first chord hit like a thunderclap. Deep, rich, full of sorrow and strength. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. A delivery cyclist braked mid-ride. The man in the suit froze, his smirk dissolving into confusion, then disbelief. This wasn't a child's clumsy attempt. This was mastery. The boy's hands moved with a certainty that defied his age, rolling arpeggios, thunderous bass lines, delicate high notes that shimmered like raindrops. He played not for applause, not for the promise of adoption, but because this piece had lived inside him since the night his grandmother took her last breath. He'd found it by accident on a scratched CD in her closet, and it had become his lullaby, his prayer, his way of saying, "I miss you." Rain fell harder now, soaking his hair, dripping off the edge of the keyboard, but he didn't flinch. The music swelled, dark, powerful, then achingly tender. People gathered without realizing they were doing it. A street vendor turned off his radio. A mother pulled her stroller to a stop. Even the cafe staff came to the door, wiping their hands on aprons, eyes wide. The man in the suit stood completely still. His arms dropped to his sides. His face, once full of arrogance, now held something unfamiliar: awe. He'd heard this piece performed in concert halls by world-famous pianists. But never like this. Never with this kind of raw, unguarded heart. When the final chord rang out, low, resonant, echoing off the brick buildings, the entire block fell into a silence so deep you could hear the rain hitting the pavement. Then, from the back, someone clapped, one pair of hands, then two, then 10. Soon the whole corner was applauding, not politely, but with real feeling like they'd just witnessed something sacred. The boy unplugged his keyboard slowly, carefully coiled the cord and placed it in his worn backpack. He picked up the coffee can, gave a small nod, not to the crowd, not to the man in the suit, just to the ground, and walked away, disappearing into the gray afternoon. The man stood there, soaked and speechless as the crowd slowly dispersed. His assistant approached. "Sir, the meeting." He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the empty milk crate where the boy had sat, as if trying to understand how someone so small could carry so much music inside. And for the first time in years, he felt small himself. He didn't know the boy's name. He didn't know his story. But he knew one thing. He had to find him, not to adopt him, but to listen. Rain still clung to the streets the next morning, puddles reflecting the gray sky like broken mirrors. The city had moved on. Buses rumbled, shopkeepers swept sidewalks, commuters hurried under umbrellas. But one man couldn't forget what he'd heard. He'd replayed it in his head all night. The depth of that first chord, the way the music seemed to rise from somewhere deep inside the boy, not just his fingers. It haunted him. He wasn't used to feeling unsettled. His life ran on control, schedules, spreadsheets, strategies. He built empires by predicting outcomes, by always knowing what came next. But this made no sense. A child alone on a sidewalk playing Rachmaninoff like it was second nature. It felt impossible. And yet he'd heard it, felt it in his chest like a heartbeat. So he returned to the corner. He arrived early before lunch rush, before the street filled with noise. The milk crate was gone. No keyboard. No coffee can. Just wet pavement and the smell of wet concrete. He stood there for a long time, hands in his coat pockets, wondering if he'd imagined it all. Then he noticed the cafe, the one with the outlet the boy had used. He walked in, ordered black coffee he didn't really want, and asked the barista if she knew anything about the kid with the keyboard. "Oh, him?" she said, wiping the counter. "Yeah, he's been coming here for months. Always polite. Never asks for anything. Just plugs in, plays for an hour or two, then leaves. Says his grandma taught him to love music." She paused. "She passed last winter. He's been on his own since." "On his own?" he asked, voice quieter than he intended. "Yeah, stays at the Hope Street Youth Shelter. Social services tried to place him, but he refused. Said he didn't want to be a burden." She shrugged. "Kid's got more pride than most adults I know, Hope Street." He'd never heard of it, but by noon, he was standing outside a modest brick building on the edge of the neighborhood, far from the glass towers he called home. It wasn't fancy, just a clean, quiet place with a small garden and a sign that read, "A safe place to rest, learn, and grow." He didn't go in right away. He watched from across the street. And then just before 3, he saw him, the boy walking up the path with his backpack, head down, shoulders slightly hunched against the world. He looked even smaller in daylight. The man took a breath and crossed the street. Inside, the shelter was warm, smelling of soup and old books. A woman at the front desk looked up as he entered. She had kind eyes and silver streaks in her hair. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for the boy who plays piano," he said. "The one from the corner near the library." She studied him for a moment, not with suspicion, but with quiet assessment. "Why?" he hesitated. He could say he wanted to help. He could offer money, but something told him that wouldn't be enough. "I heard him play," he said finally, "and I need to understand how." She nodded slowly, as if that answer meant more than any donation. "His name is Leo. He's in the back room doing homework. But he's been through a lot. Be gentle." She led him down a hallway lined with children's drawings and photos of field trips. At the end, in a small room with a window and a desk, sat the boy, bent over a math worksheet, pencil moving slowly. He looked up when they entered, and his eyes widened slightly when he saw who it was. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the man said, "I'm sorry." Leo blinked. "For what?" "For laughing. For making a joke out of something that clearly means everything to you." The boy didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. "It's okay," he said softly. "Most people don't get it." "I didn't," the man admitted. "But I want to." He didn't sit. He didn't try to impress. He just stood there, hands at his sides like a student before a teacher. And then he asked the only question that mattered. "How did you learn to play like that?" Leo looked down at his hands. My grandma. She used to play at church. When I was little, I'd sit under the piano and listen. After my parents died, she said music I'll keep their voices alive, he paused. When she got sick, I'd play for her. She couldn't talk much at the end, but she'd squeeze my hand when I got a part right. The man felt something tighten in his throat. He thought of his own childhood, growing up in a cramped apartment, working odd jobs, vowing never to be poor again. He'd built a fortress of success to keep that past buried. But this boy hadn't run from his pain. He'd turned it into something beautiful. Do you have a piano here? He asked. No, Leo said. Just the keyboard. And the library lets me practice on theirs sometimes if no one's booked it. The man nodded. Then, without fanfare, he pulled out his phone and made a call. Get me the best upright piano you can find, well-tuned, good action. Deliver it here by tomorrow. And find a music teacher. Someone kind, patient. Not a show-off, just someone who loves the craft. Leo stared at him. Why? Because talent like yours shouldn't depend on a frayed power cord and spare change, he said. And because I was wrong. He didn't offer to adopt him. Didn't promise a mansion or fame. He just said, let me help you keep playing. Leo was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, will you come hear me play it when it arrives? Yes, the man said. Every time you want me to. As he walked out of the shelter, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off wet leaves. He didn't feel like a billionaire. He didn't feel powerful. He just felt human again. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The piano arrived the next afternoon, wrapped in moving blankets, carried in by two careful men, who placed it gently in the small common room of the shelter. It wasn't flashy. No glossy black finish or gold trim. Just a warm, honey-colored upright with smooth keys and a sound that filled the room like a deep breath. When Leo saw it, he didn't run to it. He walked slowly, as if approaching something sacred. He ran his fingers over the wood, then pressed a single key. The note rang out clear and full, and he closed his eyes like he was tasting it. The man who'd arranged it stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. He hadn't expected to feel anything, just satisfaction, maybe pride in doing a good deed. But seeing the boy's face, the quiet awe in his eyes stirred something deeper. It wasn't about fixing a problem. It was about giving back a piece of someone's soul. A few days later, the music teacher came, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a loose bun and hands that looked like they'd played for decades. She didn't carry a briefcase or a syllabus, just a worn leather bag with sheet music and a thermos of tea. She introduced herself simply. I'm Ms. Rivera. I used to teach at the conservatory. Now I teach anyone who listens. Leo sat at the piano. She didn't ask him to play a scale or read notes. She just said, show me what you love. He played the Rachmaninoff again, but softer this time, more controlled. She listened without interrupting, her eyes closed, nodding slightly at certain phrases. When he finished, she didn't praise him. She asked why that piece. Because it sounds like missing someone, he said. She smiled. Then you understand music better than most professionals. Lessons began twice a week. The man came to everyone, not to watch like a judge, but to sit in the back on a folding chair, sipping coffee from a paper cup, listening. He never spoke unless spoken to. He didn't offer advice. He just showed up. And slowly something shifted between them. Not friendship, not yet, but trust. Leo stopped flinching when the door opened. He'd glance over, see the man there, and give a small nod before returning to the keys. One rainy Thursday, after a particularly tough lesson on hand independence, Leo sighed and slumped forward, forehead resting on the piano. I'll never get it right, he muttered. Ms. Rivera patted his shoulder. Music isn't about right, it's about truth. If it feels true, it is right. The man, still in the back, spoke for the first time that day. You played truth that day on the street. That's why I couldn't walk away. Leo looked at him surprised. You remember that? I remember every note. Later, as the man walked back to his car, Ms. Rivera caught up with him. You're not just funding lessons, she said gently. You're becoming part of his story. He stopped. I don't know how to do that. I've spent my life building walls, not bridges. Then start small, she said. Ask him about his grandma, not his playing. Her, so the next time, instead of sitting in the back, he brought 2 chairs and sat beside the piano. During a break, he asked, what was her favorite piece? Leo's eyes lit up. She loved Schubert. Said his music sounded like walking through a forest at dawn. He paused. She used to say, "If you can make someone feel the sunrise in a minor key, you've done your job." The man repeated that line later that night, alone in his quiet penthouse. He'd never thought of music that way, never thought of anything that way. His world was numbers, deals, outcomes. But this boy spoke of sunrises in minor keys, and somehow it made more sense than any quarterly report. Weeks passed. Leo's playing grew stronger, more confident. He started composing short pieces, little melodies named things like Rain on the Roof or Grandma's Soup. One afternoon he played one for the man without warning. It was simple, just a few repeating chords with a gentle melody on top, but it carried a warmth that made the man's chest ache. "What's it called?" he asked. "The Man Who Listened," Leo said quietly. The man didn't know what to say, so he just nodded, throat tight, and said, "Thank you." News of the boy began to spread, not through press releases, but through word of mouth. A librarian mentioned him to a local radio host. A shelter volunteer told a friend who worked at a music school. Soon, a small recital was organized in the shelter's garden. A folding chair audience, string lights, and Leo at the piano under a canopy of trees. The man sat in the front row. When Leo played his original piece again, a few people wiped their eyes. Afterward, an older woman approached the man. "You're doing a good thing," she said. "I'm not doing anything," he replied. "He's the one playing." "But you're the one who stayed," she said. "That matters more than you think." That night, as he drove home, he realized something. He hadn't thought about work all day. Not once. His mind had been full of music, of a boy's quiet courage, of the way a single note could hold an entire lifetime of love and loss. He wasn't saving Leo. Leo was saving him. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man who owned everything. He felt like a man who finally had something real to give. 2 years passed like pages turning in a well-loved book. Quietly, steadily, filled with small moments that added up to something big. The boy was no longer a child on a sidewalk with a taped-up keyboard. He was 10 now, taller, his hands stronger, his music deeper. The upright piano in the shelter's common room had become his second home, its keys worn smooth from hours of practice. And the man who once mocked him, he was still there, not as a savior, not as a father, but as a steady presence, like a lighthouse on a familiar shore. He never moved Leo out of the shelter. Instead, he worked with the staff to create a stable space for him, a small apartment above the building, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but clean, safe, and quiet. No luxury, just dignity. And every Saturday morning without fail, he'd show up with groceries, sheet music, and 2 cups of hot chocolate from the cafe down the street. People started to notice, not in a flashy way, no headlines, no viral videos, but in the neighborhood, in music circles, in the hushed conversations after recitals. "That's the boy who plays like an old soul," someone would say. "And that's the businessman who sits in the back row, always the last to clap." But the real change wasn't in what others saw. It was in what no one could hear. The quiet talks over piano benches, the shared silences after a hard piece, the way the man had learned to listen not just with his ears, but with his whole self. One spring afternoon, as cherry blossoms drifted past the window, Leo stopped playing mid-phrase. "Do you ever wonder what my parents would have thought of me now?" he asked, not looking up. The man set his coffee down. He'd been asked this before, but never so directly. "I think they'd be proud," he said carefully. "Not because you're good at piano, though you are, but because you're kind. Because you keep going even when it's hard." Leo nodded slowly. "Grandma said they loved music too. Dad played guitar. Mom sang." "I wish I could have heard them," the man said. "Me too." A pause. Then softly, "Do you ever miss your family?" The question caught him off guard. He'd built his life on independence, on the idea that success meant never needing anyone. But now, sitting in this sunlit room with a boy who'd lost everything and still offered kindness, the truth felt simple. "Yes," he admitted, "I do. I got so busy building a future I forgot to hold on to the past." Leo looked at him then. Really looked. "Maybe you don't have to choose." That night, the man went home and dug through an old storage box he hadn't opened in 20 years. Inside were photos. His mother in a faded floral dress, his father holding a toolbox, both smiling in front of a tiny house with peeling paint. He hadn't looked at them since he'd sworn he'd never live like that again. But now, for the first time, he didn't see poverty in those pictures. He saw love. He saw roots. The next week, he brought one of the photos to Leo. "This is my dad," he said. He worked construction. Came home every night with dirt under his nails and a song in his head. Used to whistle old folk tunes while fixing the porch. Leo studied the photo. He looks like he knew how to fix more than just wood. The man smiled. Yeah, he did. Something shifted after that. Their bond wasn't just about music anymore. It was about shared loss, quiet healing, the understanding that family isn't always blood. It's who shows up when the world goes quiet. Then came the invitation. A local arts council was hosting a youth showcase at the Historic's Orpheum Theater. A real stage, velvet seats, a grand piano under soft lights. They wanted Leo to perform. Not as a charity case, but as a featured artist. "Your playing speaks to people," the organizer said. "We'd be honored." Leo was nervous. "What if I mess up?" The man didn't offer empty reassurance. He just said, "Then you'll play through it. Like you always do." The night of the concert, the theater filled quickly. Not with celebrities or critics, but with neighbors, teachers, shelter volunteers, kids from Leo's school. The man sat in the third row, same as always. When Leo walked on stage in a simple white shirt and dark pants, he didn't look like a prodigy. He looked like a boy who'd been given a chance and took it with both hands. He played 3 pieces. A Chopin nocturne, a lively Scarlatti sonata, and then something new, his own composition. As the first notes rang out, gentle and searching, the man leaned forward. He recognized the melody. It was the one Leo had played that rainy afternoon 2 years ago, the one called "The Man Who Listened." But now it was fuller, richer, woven with new harmonies like a conversation that had grown over time. In the middle, a single high note shimmered like a tear held back. Then the music swelled, not with showmanship, but with gratitude. When it ended, the audience rose as one. Not because it was perfect, there was a slight stumble in the left hand near the end, but because it was real. Because it carried a story only 2 people in that room fully understood. Afterward, backstage, Leo found the man waiting. No words were needed. They just stood there for a moment, the noise of the crowd muffled behind the curtain. Then Leo said, "I wrote the last part for you." "I know," the man replied, voice rough, "and I'll carry it with me always." Later that week, the man made an announcement no one expected. He was launching a foundation, not named after himself, but after the shelter, the Hope Street Music Initiative. It would provide free instruments, lessons, and performance opportunities for kids in underserved communities. "Talent doesn't care about your address," he told a small group of donors. "It only cares if someone gives you a chance to be heard." When asked why he'd done it, he simply said, "Because one boy played a song that reminded me what really matters. And though they never signed adoption papers, though they never called each other son or dad, they had built something deeper. A family made not by law, but by choice. By showing up. By listening. In the quiet after the applause faded, that was enough. More than enough. 5 years had passed since that rainy afternoon on the sidewalk, and the city had changed. New buildings rose, old shops closed, seasons came and went, but some things stayed the same. The shelter still stood on Hope Street, though now it had a music room with soundproof walls, shelves of sheet music, and 3 pianos of different sizes. And every Saturday morning, without fail, a man in a simple coat would walk up the path carrying 2 paper cups of hot chocolate and a folder of new scores. The boy was no longer a boy. He was 15 now, tall and calm, with steady hands and a quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. He still lived in the small apartment above the shelter, not because he had to, but because it felt like home. He'd been offered scholarships, invitations to elite music schools, even a spot on a national youth orchestra tour. But he always asked the same question, "Can I come back?" Because for him, music wasn't about leaving. It was about returning, to the place that held him when he had nowhere else to go, to the people who saw him before he was someone. And then came the invitation that changed everything. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra was hosting a special community concert, a night dedicated to young artists who'd overcome hardship through music. They wanted him to perform a solo piece followed by a duet with a guest pianist. When he asked who the guest was, the organizer smiled and said, "Someone who insisted on playing with you." Said it was non-negotiable. He knew instantly. The night of the concert, the symphony hall glowed under soft golden lights. Velvet seats filled with families, teachers, neighbors, and kids from the Hope Street program, many of them holding their first concert tickets. Backstage, the man stood in a dark suit, not the sharp, expensive kind he used to wear, but something softer, more human. His hands trembled slightly as he tuned the grand piano, a habit he'd picked up from watching Leo all these years. "You nervous?" Leo asked, adjusting his cuffs. "A little," the man admitted. "I've never played in front of more than 3 people. "You'll be fine," Leo said. "Just play like you do at home." Like no one's listening. They were performing a piece they'd chosen together, Mozart's sonata for 2 pianos in D major. Not because it was flashy, but because it was a conversation. One voice asks, the other answers. One leads, the other follows. Sometimes they laugh together. Sometimes they pause just to breathe. When they walked on stage, the applause was warm, not roaring, but full of love. Leo sat at the first piano, the man at the second. No grand gestures. Just 2 people, side by side. The music began simply, like a greeting. Leo's part was clear and bright. The man's deeper, more measured, still learning, still trying, but present. There were moments when his fingers fumbled a run, when he came in a beat late. But Leo never rushed ahead. He waited, he listened. And in those small adjustments, the audience heard something deeper than perfection. Trust. By the final movement, something magical happened. The man wasn't just keeping up, he was playing with Leo, not behind him. Their hands moved in sync, their phrasing matched, and for a few minutes it didn't matter who was the teacher and who was the student. They were just 2 souls speaking the same language. When the last chord faded, the hall fell silent, then erupted. Not just applause, but cheers, whistles, tears. People stood, not because it was flawless, but because it was honest. Because they'd just witnessed something rare, not a billionaire and a prodigy, but 2 people who'd found each other in the broken places and chose to heal together. After the bows, Leo stepped to the microphone. The crowd quieted. "This piece," he said, voice steady, "is called For Abuela and the Man Who Stayed." He looked at the man beside him. "Most people think music is about talent, but I learned it's about who shows up, who listens, who believes in you even when you don't believe in yourself." He paused. "I never needed to be adopted. I just needed someone to see me." And he did. The man's eyes glistened. He didn't speak. He just placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. Brief, firm, full of everything words couldn't say. Later, at a small reception in the hall's garden, a reporter approached the man. "You've funded dozens of music programs since that day on the street. Why?" He looked across the lawn, where Leo was showing a group of wide-eyed kids how to press a piano key without fear. "Because I used to think success meant never needing anyone," he said quietly. "But real strength is knowing when to lean and when to be leaned on." That night, as they walked back to the car, the city lights shimmered like scattered stars. Leo carried his sheet music under one arm, the other tucked into his coat pocket where a small folded note rested, the first one the man had ever written him, years ago. "Keep playing." "I'm listening." They didn't talk much on the drive home. They didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable, full of shared history and quiet understanding. Back at the apartment above the shelter, Leo sat at his old upright piano, the one that had started it all, and played a few soft chords. The man leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, listening like he always did. And in that moment, nothing had changed and everything had. He wasn't a millionaire, saving a lost boy. He wasn't a prodigy rescued from the streets. They were just 2 people who'd found each other through music and chose every single day to stay. Because sometimes, the most powerful duet isn't played on a grand stage. It's played in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, where one person says, "I hear you," and the other answers, "Thank you for listening." 10 years after that first rainy afternoon, the city had grown taller, busier, louder. But on Hope Street, the rhythm remained gentle. The shelter was now a full community arts center, with practice rooms, a small recording studio, and a garden where kids gathered after school to play scales under the trees. And every Tuesday and Thursday, without fail, a young man in his early 20s would walk through the front doors, backpack slung over one shoulder, a thermos of tea in hand. He wasn't famous, not in the way the world usually measures fame. He didn't have millions of followers or a glossy album cover. But in certain circles, in music schools, in community centers, in the quiet corners of concert halls, he was known. Not just for his playing, but for the way he made others feel seen. Art now not as a side job, but as a calling. His students ranged from 6-year-olds with untied shoelaces to retirees rediscovering old dreams. He never charged them.
"Pay me back by playing for someone who needs to hear it," he'd say. And the man who once mocked him on the sidewalk?
He still came by every week. Older now, hair more silver than dark, steps a little slower. But his eyes still lit up the moment he heard a piano start to play. He no longer ran a tech empire. He'd stepped back years ago, handing leadership to others so he could focus on what mattered: the foundation, the students, the quiet work of making sure no child's gift went unheard. One spring morning, they sat together in the garden, sipping coffee as a group of kids rehearsed a simple duet inside. Birds chirped. A breeze carried the scent of blooming lilacs. "You ever think about touring again?" the older man asked. The younger one shook his head. "I played Carnegie last year. It was beautiful, but I miss this." He gestured to the open window where a little girl was carefully pressing middle C over and over, grinning each time it sounded right. "This is where music lives, not just on big stages, but in first notes." The older man smiled. "Your grandma would be proud." "I think she is," he said softly. "I feel her when I teach, like she's sitting in the back nodding." They fell into a comfortable silence. No need to fill it with words. They'd learned long ago that some of the deepest conversations happen in the spaces between. Later that week, a letter arrived. It was from a small town in rural Iowa. A high school music teacher wrote that their only piano had broken beyond repair, and their students, many from farming families, some working part-time jobs just to stay in school, had nowhere to practice. "We don't have money for a new one," the letter said. "But if there's any way your foundation could help, even just to lend an old one, these kids deserve a chance." The younger man read it twice, then handed it to the older one. "Let's go see them," the older man said. "No press, no cameras, just us and a piano, just us." 2 days later, they drove west in a rented van with a donated upright strapped in the back. The town was small, population under 2,000, one main street, a diner with checkered floors. The school was modest, its music room bare except for a few chairs and a metronome on a dusty shelf. When they walked in, the students stood up nervously. The teacher introduced them, voice trembling with gratitude. The younger man didn't give a speech. He just rolled up his sleeves, helped unload the piano, tuned it himself, and then sat down. "Anyone want to try?" he asked. A boy in a flannel shirt stepped forward. He played a simple folk tune his grandfather had taught him on an old harmonica. It wasn't polished, but it was full of heart. Afterward, the younger man showed him how to add chords underneath. "Now it's a conversation," he said. Between the melody and the harmony, the older man watched from the doorway, arms crossed, eyes bright. He remembered another boy years ago playing Rachmaninoff on a sidewalk with rain in his hair, and now here he was passing the torch, not with fanfare but with kindness. Before they left, the students gathered around the piano and played a song together, just 3 chords, repeated with everyone singing a local harvest hymn. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. On the drive back, the sun setting over endless fields, the younger man said, "You know, I used to think music was my escape. From grief, from loneliness, from being nobody. And now?" the older man asked. "Now I know it's my way back, to people, to purpose, to you." The older man didn't reply right away. He just reached over and squeezed his shoulder, the way he had after that first recital years ago. Back in the city, they returned to Hope Street as dusk fell. Kids were still practicing, windows open, notes drifting into the warm air like fireflies. The younger man went inside to check on a student struggling with a tricky passage. The older man stayed outside, sitting on the garden bench, listening. A neighbor walking her dog paused. "You two are something special, you know that?" He shook his head. "We're just ordinary people who got lucky." "No," she said gently. "You chose to stay. That's not luck. That's love." Inside, the piano played on, halting at first, then smoother, then soaring. And as the music filled the street, the older man closed his eyes and smiled, because the greatest legacy wasn't in headlines or halls. It was in the quiet choice to show up, again and again, for the music and for each other. Years turned into decades, but the heart of the story never faded, it just deepened, like the grain of old wood or the tone of a well-loved piano. The young man was no longer so young. Lines had appeared around his eyes. His hair had silvered at the temples, and his hands, though still strong, moved with the careful grace of someone who knew time was precious. He still taught at the Hope Street Art Center, though now he also mentored teachers, wrote simple method books for beginners, and hosted free listening nights where anyone, homeless, elderly, immigrant, student, could come and hear live music without paying a cent. The older man had slowed down too. He walked with a cane now, his steps measured, but his mind was sharp and his presence still carried that quiet warmth that made people feel safe. He no longer ran the foundation. It was now led by a former student from the early days, but he still came every week, not as a donor, but as a listener. He'd sit in the back of the main room, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees, letting the music wash over him like a familiar prayer. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted past the windows, a letter arrived. It wasn't from a school or a reporter. It was handwritten on thick cream paper sealed with wax. Inside, an invitation. The city was dedicating a new public piano garden in the Central Park, a circle of weatherproof pianos where anyone could sit and play. And they wanted him to perform at the opening. Not just him, but them, together one last time. He showed the letter to the older man over tea. "You think we still can?" the older man asked, glancing at his stiff fingers. "We don't have to play fast," the younger one said. "We just have to play true." They chose a piece they'd never performed before, Schubert's Fantasy in F minor for 4 hands. It was tender, reflective, full of shared silences and gentle echoes. They rehearsed slowly, patiently, in the same room where it had all begun. Sometimes the older man missed a note. Sometimes his hands ached, but the younger one never rushed him. He'd just pause, wait, and say, "Try it again. I'm right here." The day of the dedication arrived crisp and clear, the sky a perfect blue. Hundreds gathered in the park, families, students, former shelter kids now grown, even a few who remembered that rainy day on the library corner. At the center of the garden stood 5 pianos, each painted by local artists, keys gleaming in the sunlight. When they walked out together, older man leaning lightly on his cane, younger one beside him, calm and steady, the crowd rose not with cheers, but with a wave of quiet respect. This wasn't a spectacle, it was a homecoming. They sat at the grandest of the pianos, side by side, just as they had years ago in the symphony hall. Only now the roles had softened into something deeper than teacher and student, richer than benefactor and artist. They were simply 2 souls who had walked a long road together. The music began softly, like a memory returning. The older man's part was simple, steady, the foundation. The younger one wove melodies above it, fluid and warm. There were moments when their hands brushed, not by accident, but by habit, by love. At one point, the older man faltered on a chord. The younger one didn't skip ahead. He held the silence, gave him space, and when the note finally came, clear and sure, the audience exhaled as one. When the last chord faded into the autumn air, no one clapped right away. They just sat, letting the feeling settle like dust after a storm. Then slowly, a child near the front stood and began to clap. Others joined. Soon the whole park was applauding, not for perfection, but for presence, for loyalty, for the quiet miracle of 2 people who chose each other. Again and again across a lifetime. Afterward, as they walked back through the garden, people reached out, not for autographs, but just to say thank you. A woman with tired eyes said, "My son plays now because of you." A teenager handed the younger man a folded sheet of music. "I wrote this after hearing you play last year." He accepted it with both hands. "I'll play it next week." At Hope Street. Later, on a bench beneath a maple tree, they sat in comfortable silence. The older man looked out at the pianos, now filled with strangers playing simple tunes, laughing, trying, sharing, he said, voice soft. "I used to think legacy was buildings, companies, names on plaques. And now?" the younger one asked. "Now I know it's this." He gestured to the park, to the music floating on the breeze. "It's the ripple, the kid who hears a note and thinks, well, maybe I can do that too." The younger man nodded. "Grandma used to say music is a seed. You plant it and you never know where it'll grow." They stayed until the sun dipped low, casting long shadows. As they walked back to the car, the older man paused at the edge of the path. "I don't have much time left," he said plainly. not with sadness, but with peace. But I want you to promise me something. Anything. Keep the door open, at Hope Street always. I will, the younger one said, voice thick. As long as I'm breathing, the older man smiled. Then I've got nothing left to worry about. Months later, on a quiet winter morning, he passed in his sleep, surrounded by photos, a stack of old concert programs, and a single sheet of music on the nightstand. The man who listened, handwritten in a child's careful script. At the memorial, there was no eulogy, just music. Students, teachers, neighbors, strangers, all took turns playing at the pianos in the garden. Some played Chopin, some played folk songs. One little girl played for Elise, just like the boy on the sidewalk once had, and the younger man. He sat at the very first piano, the one from the shelter, and played the Rachmaninoff Prelude. Not as a performance, as a thank you. Years after that, the Hope Street Arts Center still stands. The pianos in the park are worn smooth from use. And every Saturday morning, if you walk by the garden, you might see a man in his 60s sitting with a child, showing them how to press middle C. He doesn't tell them the whole story. He just says music isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up. And then he listens, just like someone once listened to him. Time doesn't stop, but some stories echo long after the last note fades. The man who once sat on a rainy sidewalk with a broken keyboard was now in his late 60s, his hair mostly white, his steps slower, but still sure. He still lived in the same apartment above the Hope Street Arts Center, though the building had grown, new wings added, more practice rooms, a small recording booth where kids made their first demos. He no longer taught every day, but he opened his door to anyone who knocked, especially the ones who looked like they'd been told you're not good enough one too many times. The city had changed again. Glass towers rose where old brick shops once stood. Traffic hummed louder, life moved faster, but Hope Street remained a quiet harbor. And every spring, on the anniversary of that first performance, the community gathered in the park for what they called the listening day. No tickets. No stage, just pianos, benches, and an open invitation. Come as you are. Play if you can. Listen if you need to. This year, something new happened. A young woman arrived early, carrying a worn backpack and a folder of sheet music. She was in her 20s, with tired eyes and hands that looked like they'd worked hard for everything they had. She sat at one of the public pianos and played a piece, simple at first, then unfolding into something rich and sorrowful, full of longing and quiet strength. People stopped walking. Dogs paused mid-bark. Even the pigeons seemed to listen. When she finished, silence held for a breath, then soft applause. The older man, watching from a bench nearby, felt a familiar tug in his chest. He'd heard that kind of playing before, not in technique, but in truth. He walked over slowly. "That was beautiful," he said. She looked up, surprised. "Thank you. I learned it from a recording of you years ago. The one from the symphony hall," he smiled. "You play like someone who's been through something." "My mom passed last year," she said quietly. "She used to sing while she cleaned houses. Said music kept her going. I've been working night shifts at a diner saving for lessons. But I'm scared I'm too old to start." He sat beside her on the bench. "I was 8 when I played for coins. He was 50 when he first touched a piano key. Age doesn't matter. Heart does." She looked at him, really looked. "Are you?" He nodded. "Yeah, that was me." She didn't ask for help, didn't beg for a chance. She just said, "I just wanted to say thank you. Your story made me believe I could try." That afternoon, he invited her to Hope Street, not as a student, but as a guest. "Play for the kids," he said. "Let them hear what real music sounds like." She did. And by the end of the week, she was teaching a beginner class, free, twice a week, just like he once had. This became the quiet rhythm of his later years, not building monuments, but lighting candles. One student led to another. A boy from the shelter recorded a song that went viral. Not for fame, but because it spoke of loneliness and hope in a way that resonated with thousands. A retired nurse started a music for memory program, playing piano for dementia patients using methods she'd learned at Hope Street workshops. The ripple kept spreading, not with noise, but with presence. One winter evening, as snow dusted the streets, he received a package with no return address. Inside was a small wooden box and a note. "For the man who taught us that music belongs to everyone." He opened it. Nestled in velvet was a single piano key, ivory, slightly worn, and beneath it a folded letter. It was from a group of former students now scattered across the country. Teachers, therapists, composers, even a firefighter who played at community centers on his days off. They'd each contributed a memory, a thank you, a short melody they'd written in his honor. At the bottom, they'd written, "We are your legacy, and we promise to keep the door open." He read it by lamplight, tears tracing slow paths down his cheeks. Not from sadness, but from awe. He'd never set out to change the world. He'd just refused to let the world silence him, and in doing so gave others permission to speak. The next morning, he walked to the park before sunrise. The public piano stood silent under a thin layer of snow. He brushed off one bench, sat, and played a simple lullaby his grandmother used to hum. No audience, no purpose, just music offered freely to the dawn. As he played, a little boy appeared at the edge of the path, holding his mother's hand. He couldn't have been more than 6. He listened, wide-eyed, until the last note faded. "Can I try?" he asked. The older man moved over. Of course, the boy pressed a single key. Then another. Awkward, unsure, but full of wonder. "Good," the older man said. "Now do it again." And so the circle continued, not with fanfare, not with fame, but with one person showing up for another, one note at a time. Years later, long after he was gone, people still came to that piano in the park. Some left flowers. Some played his favorite pieces. Others just sat quietly, remembering how one boy's courage and one man's choice to listen changed everything. His name wasn't on any building. There were no statues, but if you walked through Hope Street on a Tuesday afternoon, you'd hear it, the sound of dozens of hands on keys, young and old, rich and poor, all playing not for perfection, but for connection. And in that music, he lived on, because the truest legacies aren't carved in stone. They're sung in classrooms, played on street corners, and whispered in the quiet spaces between one heart and another. And as long as someone is willing to listen, the song never really ends.